there are people living in the cities as well and what have you that really get this at a very deep level and are essentially applying these principles into their own life. How come we're not doing this on a larger scale? And in fact, why don't we do it at a larger scale? Why is it that we are treating the planet as a piece of property when we can actually make it a trust? So trusts are legally binding instruments. And my idea is that, in fact, if we get even more people signed up to this concept, then arguably you can say that, in fact, by dint of numbers alone, this is the preeminent law to apply, rather than saying, okay, what was called terra nullius, no one lives in this patch, and, those locals will ignore them. We'll just put our, stake in here and put our flag up and say, okay, it's now ours. And we'll write up a contract and say, this now is ours, we own it, and we'll rubber stamp it, and therefore we've imposed an ownership on it. This is a very, human-made construct to actually say we have ownership. Ownership per se is a very strange idea, which was born of, unfortunately, lawyers. But if we step back and actually look at guiding principles that really are nature's own laws, then we understand it more in terms of trusteeship, stewardship.
I had a very interesting experience after my father died in 2003. I was sitting in my parents' home, and there were strangers in the house going through boxes and packing up all the stuff. And I had this profound insight watching my dad go through all kinds of struggles in his life about how successful he is or how much he owns or how good he did and the whole thing. I sat there in the living room thinking, for what? All that suffering, all that concern, all that worry to own, and it's all gone. It doesn't go with him. It really puts into perspective what you're saying, which is that we are stewards.
Yeah.
We own nothing. And I believe in my heart, on my 25-year mission, that ownership and that construct is one of the foundational elements for suffering for all of humanity. Owning and territoriality is part of the seeds of destruction of why a lot of things are going on all over the earth, from GMO foods to bad medical practices to the pharmaceutical companies getting to run the show, of all medicine, of life extension, of anti-aging, of everything. And this, as you know, goes to every single industry, everywhere. And it was this profound moment of getting that it's ridiculous. This thing about ownership, the need to own. I understand having dominion and stewarding something and needing to make sure it works in a particular way. But this thing of ownership is craziness. And we are living in the manifestation of this paradigm.
Yes, absolutely. And what we're needing to do is change the paradigm and really change it radically. It's not about incremental little bit by little bit. If you look at shifts in consciousness over time, what happens is you get a certain build and then, poof, suddenly everything changes. The abolition of slavery is really telling in this. Back here in the UK, our main proponent who gave up his life to fight for the abolition of slavery was William Wilberforce. And he fought that battle the whole of his life. Literally 2 days before he died, they put in the laws that banished slavery. But what was so interesting was that from the year before that law was put in to the year after it, it was a huge shift in consciousness. Prior to the law being put in, it was absolutely acceptable to have a black in chains. But a year after, it was not. It was just not the done thing. Now, that's not to say that we don't have slavery in other muted forms nowadays, but the liberation of actually having someone that was a piece of property, because, of course, ultimately that's what slaves were. They were your property to use and abuse as you so wished, had gone. And that shift in consciousness was truly enormous, and law effected that shift. Because William Wilberforce realized very early on that it was pointless to go around everyone who had a slave, about 6 million people had slaves then, and say, look, would you mind awfully just using your slave a little less? That's akin to energy efficiency, because actually slaves were a form of energy. It's just human energy. Right. They lifted our things, they moved everything. And they've been replaced with, fossil fuel energy, which, gives us the energy to use all our vehicles and such like. But he knew that it was no point going around and saying, okay, can you implement 10% efficiency rules here? He knew that you actually have to go upstream to the source of the problem, to the companies. Then it was 300 companies. Now it's 3,000 corporations. The numbers even are in tandem here. 300 companies that were trading in slaves. And he realized there were three things needed to be done. You needed to pool the subsidies. Slavery was heavily subsidized. In fact, it was the plantations. Sugar plantations were the first monocrop that we had. And they were heavily subsidized because they needed lots of slaves to work in them. You have to pool the subsidies. You have to make illegal that which is wrong, which for him it was human slavery. And you have to put in place new subsidies. So that it's not about putting the corporations out of business, but it's about getting them to reinvent the wheel. And within a year, all those ones that were trading in slaves were trading in tea in China. And they all argued 4 arguments that were put. And those 4 arguments were, it will mean loss of jobs if you get rid of our slave trade. It's uneconomic. It's a necessity, and the people demand it. Those are the same 4 arguments that are being put today for keeping fossil fuel. And fossil fuel is essentially a form of slavery. But this time round, it's planetary slavery that we have.
It's profound. I know that you said you only had an hour for today, and an hour is a long time, and I so appreciate you joining me. I wanted to invite you, as time opens up for you, to come back on the show as we talk about other issues. I just really appreciate you coming here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on the show, and I wish Anita Roddick was alive today, because I'd love to sit with you and her in London. Maybe Gordon, you and I can sit down in a studio and talk and see what can be done. Have you met Gordon?
She's a very good woman. Yes, I do. Yes. He's a very good man. And she's fighting good causes too.
So, Polly Higgins, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to find out more about Polly's work, you can go to www.treeshaverights2.com. Polly, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kim. It's been an absolute delight.
Say it's rainmaking time, will you? It's rainmaking time.
It's rainmaking time.
Indeed it is.